At every family gathering, my in-laws treated me as if I didn't exist. They passed dishes around the table without ever looking in my direction, skipped over me in conversations, and acted like I was nothing more than an empty chair. At first, I tried to excuse their behavior as simple forgetfulness or cultural differences, but deep down, the sting of being constantly ignored was impossible to brush off. I wanted so badly to fit in, yet every visit left me feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. I didn't know how long I could keep pretending everything was fine. Until one day, my husband made an announcement that would change everything. My name is Laura, and I am 34 years old. I married my husband, Daniel, 5 years ago, and I had always believed that love could overcome anything, even disapproving parents. But sitting at that dinner table excluded yet again, I started to wonder if love was really enough. The silence around me was louder than any insult, and though Daniel noticed my pain, he rarely said anything in front of them. I tried to convince myself to stay patient, to wait for a moment when things might shift, but I never expected that the first real crack in their wall of indifference would come from Daniel himself, and it would hit them like a thunderclap. That evening, as the meal dragged on with their usual chatter, stories about vacations, inside jokes, even plans for the upcoming holidays, I sat quietly pushing food around my plate. My mother-in-law didn't once ask me how my job was going, even though she had grilled everyone else about their careers. My father-in-law refilled glasses of wine but skipped mine, pretending not to notice. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding in frustration, silently begging Daniel to speak up. Then, right as dessert was being served, Daniel put down his fork and cleared his throat. The room hushed. He never interrupted his parents. His voice was calm, but there was a weight in it that made everyone freeze. "I need all of you to listen carefully," he said, locking eyes with his mother. "I've noticed the way you've been treating Laura. Ignoring her, dismissing her, acting like she doesn't belong. It ends tonight." For the first time since I had married him, Daniel's tone carried a sharp edge, one that left even his father momentarily speechless. My chest tightened as I watched my in-laws' faces pale, their smiles wiped away. The silence that followed was suffocating, but in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't invisible anymore. The silence around the table lasted only a few seconds before my mother-in-law slammed her hand against the table, rattling the silverware. "How dare you accuse us, Daniel?" she snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "We have always welcomed her into our home. If she feels ignored, perhaps it is because she doesn't know how to contribute to family conversations." Her words hit me like ice water. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but before I could, my father-in-law chimed in, his voice dripping with disdain. "Son, you're exaggerating. We treat Laura just like anyone else. Maybe she simply doesn't fit in with our way of doing things." My cheeks burned as their lies spread across the table. Every instance of them overlooking me came rushing back. Every time they left me out of a group photo, every time they handed dishes around the table but skipped me, every time they laughed at jokes I wasn't part of. And now, instead of acknowledging it, they twisted it into my fault. That Daniel's jaw tightened. "Stop pretending. I've watched you humiliate her for years. Don't you dare try to gaslight her in front of me." His voice shook with rage, but his hands were steady as he reached across the table and held mine. The room grew hot with tension. I could feel the judgmental stares of his siblings, torn between loyalty to their parents and shock at Daniel's defiance. For a moment, no one moved, and then his sister, Claire, stood up abruptly, her face red with fury. "If you're going to turn this family upside down over her," she spat, pointing directly at me, "then maybe you don't deserve to be part of it anymore." The words hung in the air like a dagger, and I felt my stomach drop. Claire's words sliced through the air, leaving the room frozen. For a moment, I thought Daniel might lose his temper, but instead he let out a slow breath and stood up from his chair. His sudden movement made everyone else flinch. "You think you can erase Laura from this family?" he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Fine. Then hear this. We've been keeping something from all of you. Laura and I bought a new house together. It's in both of our names, and we're moving in next month." Gasps erupted around the table. His mother's hand flew to her chest as though she'd been struck. His father narrowed his eyes, his lips curling in disgust. "You made such a decision without consulting us? he demanded. Daniel laughed bitterly. That's exactly the point. I don't need your approval. I'm done waiting for you to acknowledge my wife. If you won't respect her, then you'll have to live with the fact that we're building a life without you. My heart thudded in my chest. I hadn't expected him to reveal our plans that night. We had spoken of waiting until the paperwork was finalized, but as I looked around at their shocked faces, I realized his timing was perfect. Claire scoffed loudly. A house? With her? You're throwing your future away, Daniel. But Daniel only tightened his grip on my shoulder.
No, Claire.
I'm securing it. The room buzzed with anger, betrayal, and disbelief. And in that storm, I finally felt something shift. I wasn't the invisible daughter-in-law anymore. I was suddenly the center of the conversation, the one they could no longer pretend didn't exist. The room trembled with tension after Daniel's revelation. His parents exchanged a look so sharp it could have cut glass, and then his father leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. His eyes fixed on me like I was some kind of intruder who had broken into their home. You planned all of this, didn't you? He said coldly. From the very beginning, you targeted my son. You saw his potential, his career, his savings, and you decided to trap him. And now, you've managed to convince him to waste it all on you. My throat tightened, the words lodging in my chest. Before I could answer, my mother-in-law chimed in, her voice rising like a bitter chorus. We tried to warn him, but he wouldn't listen. You've manipulated him, Laura. You've poisoned him against his own family. And now you're tearing us apart with your selfishness. The accusations burned. My hands trembled under the table, not from guilt, but from rage. How many times had I sat quietly while they dismissed me? How many dinners had I endured in silence, hoping for the smallest shred of kindness? And now, after years of their cruelty, they dared to paint me as the villain. Daniel's face turned crimson. Enough, he shouted, slamming his palm against the table so hard the plates rattled. Stop blaming Laura for everything. She didn't trap me, I chose her. I chose us. And if you can't respect my wife, then maybe you don't deserve to have me in your lives. The air grew thick. No one moved. The siblings stared in stunned silence, torn between fear and disbelief. For the first time, Daniel's parents looked unsettled, like their grip on him was finally slipping. And then my mother-in-law whispered, almost trembling, if you walk away with her, Daniel, then don't expect to walk back. The ultimatum dropped like a hammer, and I felt the floor beneath me shift. The silence that followed her ultimatum was heavier than anything I had ever felt. My heart pounded in my chest, and though I wanted to scream back, I found myself frozen, staring at Daniel, waiting for his response. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch in his cheek. Then so be it, he said finally, his voice steady but low, each word cutting through the air like a blade. If my choice is between a family that despises my wife and a life with the woman I love, then the decision is already made. We're done here. Gasps erupted around the table. His youngest brother muttered something under his breath, while Claire stormed out of the room, her heels pounding against the floor like gunshots. My father-in-law's face turned purple with fury, but my mother-in-law sat back, stunned, her lips trembling as if she couldn't believe Daniel had actually chosen me over them. I felt a swirl of emotions. Fear, relief, sorrow, and a spark of triumph I couldn't quite suppress. I had wanted acceptance, not war, but now the lines were drawn. There would be no going back to quiet dinners filled with cold shoulders. This was a fracture that could never be mended. Daniel stood, pulling me gently to my feet. Let's go, he whispered. His hand in mine was firm, protective, unshakable. As we walked toward the door, I felt dozens of eyes on my back, filled with resentment, shock, and disbelief. But just before we reached the hallway, my father-in-law called out, his voice booming with finality. If you leave tonight, Daniel, don't expect an inheritance. Don't expect support. You're cutting yourself off from everything we've built. Daniel paused only for a second, then looked over his shoulder. Keep it. We'll build something better on our own. And with that, he opened the door, and together we stepped out into the cold night air, leaving behind the family who had once pretended I didn't even exist. The car ride home was quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't heavy but healing. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting over mine. as if to remind me that I wasn't alone. Not anymore, not ever again. The city lights blurred past the window, but my mind was replaying every word, every glare, every moment of that dinner. For years, I had begged silently to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be accepted. And in one night, instead of being welcomed into their circle, I had walked away with something far more valuable. Proof that Daniel's loyalty was truly mine. It wasn't easy. Cutting ties with family, even a toxic one, leaves wounds that take time to heal. There were days after when I questioned if I had done the right thing, if I had been too sensitive, if I should have tried harder. But then I remembered their cold stares, their cutting words, and the ultimatum that left no room for peace. Some doors close not because you want them to, but because keeping them open only destroys you. Daniel and I moved into our new home a month later. It wasn't grand, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Every nail in the wall, every box unpacked, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. And as we sat together on the floor that first night, surrounded by half-opened cartons and takeout boxes, I realized I finally belonged somewhere, not because his family approved, but because we had chosen each other. That if there's one thing I've learned, it's that respect is not optional in a relationship. Love cannot survive without it, and no one deserves to be treated like they are invisible. To anyone listening who has felt pushed aside or diminished, you are worth more than silence at the dinner table. Choose the people who choose you back. And if you've stayed with me through this story until the very end, thank you. Truly. Sharing this wasn't easy, but maybe it will remind someone out there that they're not alone. If you found even a piece of my journey meaningful, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and left a like. It helps me know these stories matter, and it keeps me strong enough to keep telling them.